am LindaAnn LoSchiavo, and this is a rondel prime of 14 lines. It's called Emily Post's Etiquette Book for Ghosts. Emily Post's Etiquette Book for Ghosts is a must since spirits are unruly, annoying, crass, and insistent, truly. Tactless phantoms offended? Just quote Post. Are spooks invasive when they might have phoned? This rule book helps avoid unpleasantries. Emily Post, Etiquette Book for Ghosts. It's a must when spirits get unruly. It's your nature to be a gracious host, but poltergeists will taunt guests unduly. Specters will scare domestic pets mutely. Next time Wraiths visit, be prepared to quote Emily Post's Etiquette Book for Ghosts. My copy's autographed. Excuse my boast. Well, this book evolved organically. I was running a poetry critique group, and we had all written Haibun on Santa Muerta, a Mexican folkloric figure who has early November connections. And then we all loved Halloween, so we just worked backwards to October 31st. And eventually, it just became a project between David and myself, but it actually started at a critique group with many people writing to the theme and contributing poems. And the central theme embraces the seasonal features of All Hallows Eve and the Day of the Dead, balancing its lightness, darkness, and historical aspects. Why did I take on a Macabre book to begin with? I'm an October Scorpio. Halloween is my favorite holiday, and I felt this collection would resonate with many other Halloween fans, and it did. The book sold over 100 copies before it was released on October 18th. Co-writing a book of poetry involves two partnerships. A partnership with the theme, an idea that's sufficiently engaging and sustainable, as well as a partnership with your other writer, a person you respect and count on to fulfill his end of the agreement to complete the book. So it's very important that you first have that partnership with the material, because you're going to be wedded to that material for possibly months, maybe even up to a year. So that's the first partnership. But David was a great partner because, first of all, we're both in the Science Fiction Poetry Association together. So we have a lot of commonalities, what we write about, how we approach material. And David is the type, if you give him a deadline, he will stick with it. And he was undergoing a big transition, moving from Texas back to Europe, back to Belgium, in the middle of writing the book. So I must say he's really a trooper because he made all his deadlines. Well, originally for the group, I created a 5-section structure that I thought would require less front involvement for a group of speculative poets, assuming some of them had also already written on ghosts and witches and so forth, graveyards, etc. And we decided that the book would follow an orchestrated structures narrative arc. That is something that links dissimilar ideas that share one single characteristic, so in this case, Halloween. And then the poems submitted to the project were critiqued by the entire group, who gave us the benefit of their ideas, and then they were revised and improved, and sometimes they went to 3 and 4 rounds of revision. So we're very fortunate because we had a lot of people weighing in on the material that eventually made it into the book. However, the manuscript was becoming way too dark, too horror-dominated. So to balance the mood and tone, I decided to create a final section, a 6th section called The Lighter Shade, wanting to add some fun and black humor into this book, because some of the poems about the graveyard, and, at this point, David and I weren't sectioned off from the group yet, so we had a lot of horror poems with blood and gore and all sorts of stuff that never made it into the book because those people sectioned themselves off. But the book was at one point so dark and depressing and bloody that I had to step back from it and say, let's bring some fun into it. But a lot of book buyers commented on the structure. A lot of people came to the book liking Halloween, but not used to reading poetry about Halloween subjects, and they felt that the structure made the book easier to follow. And my follow-up manuscript is Always Haunted Halloween Poems, and I'm going to use the same 6-part structure, but this book will focus on October 31st crimes, hauntings, and injustice. Well, that's easy because the Santa Marta collaboration was the absolute first, and the whole group did it. And that inspired the entire project. It just took off from there. Eventually, David and I wrote 2 more of these to create our quartet. You probably noticed that we deliberately didn't sign our poems in the book. We have our byline on the cover, but we don't differentiate who wrote what. And I think that's very interesting because a lot of collaborations are filled with bylines. This one wrote this, and this one wrote that. And it's just the mystery that David and I will take to our grave. We'll never say who wrote it, but I will reference some of David's bylines. So your readers will be the only ones who are in on the secret. The last poem I wrote was A Sleepy Hollow Halloween, inspired by Washington Irving's Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So my poem features the Headless Horseman. And he's one of several pop culture figures that we embraced here. We used a lot of familiar names, and we try to make them even stranger. For example, Emily Post doesn't just have an etiquette book, she has an etiquette book for ghosts. And the last poem David wrote was A Remembered Grave. And I was more pleased with our quartet on Santa Marta than with A Remembered Grave, because it's actually not a speculative poem, it's just moody and atmospheric. And I felt his speculative and humorous verses far outdid A Remembered Grave, in my opinion. But that's what closed the book, and Santa Marta was actually at the November part of the All Hallows Eve, actually opened the book. Well, the first thing is to coax a reader into the book. We didn't want to start with one of the goriest poems. So David's poem, The Season in Between, introduces essential themes associated with Halloween, an awareness of a haunted realm that might lend itself to other angles and may feed superstitions. So to quote from the poem, the slant of the light opens my eyes to other angles. I heed my superstitions more in these ashen weeks when fruits swell and misshape. And we thought that would put everyone right in the center of the autumnal season, the harvest, and so forth. And then the final poem, To Die in French, again by David Davies, pokes fun at the calamity a hapless foreign tourist might encounter in the afterlife. What if you meet death in a country where you don't even speak the native language, and then all the spirits avoid you? And we thought, this is a dilemma that even Dante did not foresee in his Divine Comedy. And the last poem's finale also contains a double entendre that you probably caught. David writes, L'amour can take you anywhere. Bonne chance. Adieu. La fin. And it's a clever way to bid goodbye to our readers. We say adieu, la fin, the end, right? Again. So in this way, we wanted to seduce readers into the Halloween spirit without first encountering a poem that's too frightening. And then they leave the book with a smile, or so we hope. Oh, yes. Right off the bat, I can mention 2. One is Every Girl Becomes a Wolf by Andrea Blythe and Madeline Wiseman. And that was so extraordinary because they take a lot of folk tales and they perceive the women as the wolves and how that grows. And they had a lot of different kinds of formats. They had sonnets and villanelles and ghazals and all sorts of things. It was wonderful. Those are 2 SFPA, Science Fiction Poetry Association members. And another one, which was really wonderful, was Satan's Sisters by Mary Terzillo and Marge Simon. And that was a collection of speculative poems that were all nonfiction, all based on these really terrible women throughout history, murderesses and gosh knows what. And they were struggling to finish it because they had to do a lot of research, and the research that they did into these real life women was so gory and so terrible. But they did finish the book, and it won an Elgin Award. So yeah, those were two collaborations that were very different. One kind of lighthearted fantasy with fairy tales, and the other one being nonfiction and actually based on memorable women who were kind of infamous for the dark deeds that they committed. So those were very, they did very well, very highly praised, and not too distant. I think Every Girl Becomes the Wolf was either 2018, 2019, and maybe Satan's Sisters was just around that time too. Oh, yes, I have two books coming up this year. I have Acquainted with the Night, published by Beacon. That's a full collection of 66 books, and that'll be out in the spring. And then I'll have a chapbook called Felons d'Essai, Poems About Suicide, and that's coming out from Yukioto, probably in another month or so. Very interesting poems, all of them nonfiction, all about actual suicides. And people take their lives, and if there's any news articles about it, it's always the last terrible moment. And my suicide poems try to give you an idea of the life that preceded that dark final moment. And the book was accepted in 5 days, so I guess I did a good job.